So my name's Ed. As mentioned, I'm the Vice President and Head of Strategic Partnerships of Temello. I saw somebody talking about job titles earlier and how they seem somewhat strange and redundant. I think my job title is probably a good example of that. But really what my job title means is that I spend a lot of my time speaking with institutional investors across a kind of broad spectrum. So we kind of fleetingly use the terms asset owners, but I speak with particularly big pension funds, but also endowment funds, charities, etc., etc. And what we're trying to work out really is how can institutional investors, asset owners more broadly, and the members of or beneficiaries of those schemes start to use the power which is within their investments, and particularly the power that is within their pensions. So on the train here this morning, I saw a quote from Catherine Howarth. Some of you might know Catherine. She's the CEO of Share Action, which I thought perfectly frames my session. So I hope Catherine doesn't mind, but I've stolen her words to kick off. So she said, institutional investors have extraordinary power to influence how companies behave and the impact they have on the world that we live in. We see examples of investors stepping into their power to drive positive action. For example, on emissions cuts, the payment of living wages and more. But we also see significant complacency in the investment community. And it is that complacency that I really want to talk about today. So I'm going to do so through the lens of two groups: asset owners, as I mentioned, or asset owners who invest on our behalves, or perhaps most importantly, appoint fund managers to do that. And through our own eyes, so as individual investors through our workplace pensions. As again, somebody said earlier, we are all part of this system. So I would presume most people are fairly familiar with the companies on the screen. They are all companies that we know and either directly or indirectly use. They heat our homes, power our cars, feed us, entertain us, inform us. But they are also fundamental actors in our society. They play a role in either solving for or not some of the biggest systemic issues that we face, be that climate change, AI integration, human rights, or inequality. And some of these companies have now become so large that they wield greater power than many governments. Apple alone is valued at more than $3 trillion. I wonder how many of their products are in the room today. And I am guilty as charged at the front. So if we accept that such companies have and will continue to shape the world that we live in, the question I really want to ask today is, who is holding them to account? Now, theoretically, it's all of us, right? So public companies are accountable to their shareholders, and it is likely that as a member of a workplace pension, you are personally invested into each one of these businesses. As representatives of foundations, charities, and endowment funds, it is also likely that your funds are investing into many of them, making you asset owners and your beneficiaries shareholders. At least once a year, these companies will hold a general meeting. It is an opportunity for the board to present on their strategy, wax lyrical about all the great things that they're doing. But as a shareholder, it is an important opportunity for you to ask questions and, according to law, vote to decide on the future direction of that company. So I use the recent BP AGM as an intentionally provocative and pretty obvious example of the current system failures. So this year, a shareholder resolution was filed by climate campaigners Follow This, calling for BP to align its emissions reductions with the Paris Climate Agreement. It received only 16% support from shareholders. Separately, a number of significant and progressive pension schemes, including Nest, which is the National Employment Savings Trust, who currently manage and represent 11 million pension members, publicly announced in advance of that AGM that they would be voting against the re-election of BP's chairman, in protest at BP's decision to dramatically water down its plans on its transition to net zero. BP's CEO had originally set out a plan that included cutting their oil and gas production by 40% by the end of this decade, while significantly increasing capital allocation to renewables. However, BP reset the target to just 25% without single consultation with shareholders, shortly after reporting its highest profits of its 114-year history. Not to mention doing this during a very real cost of living crisis. So even with the hard work of a minority group of pension funds, at the AGM, BP's chair was re-elected with a majority of 90% and remains in position today. In fact, the BP AGM is just one example of an increasing trend of climate and shareholder resolutions more broadly getting less support. I emphasise less support. Of course, corporate governance is not a new concept. It has been the much less discussed G in ESG, environmental, social and governance issues. But governance has changed, and today we expect companies not to just consider their profits, but also people and planet, not just value, but values. So today I do want to talk to you about our company Tumelo. This is us all looking very joyous on a work trip down in Somerset. But more specifically, I want to talk to you about the importance of shareholder democracy, or the current lack of it. So if we conducted a straw poll now, and I won't do this for the risk of kind of social suicide, but if we did a straw poll on the BP climate vote, or on executive pay, or on workers' rights, I'm fairly confident that we could all predict the outcome. So my question is, why is this view not being represented at company AGMs? That same question sparked the idea for Tumelo. So Georgia, our co-founder and CEO, was studying at Cambridge University. And Cambridge, like other universities, some probably in this room, run an endowment fund. It's invested into pooled funds with the aim of generating returns for future beneficiaries. And the first question Georgia and some of her peers at the time asked is, which companies is that fund invested into? Information that wasn't available. Secondly, it became quickly evident that as students, or beneficiaries, much like you as members of pension schemes, when you do have that information available, there is no mechanism, no way for you to express an opinion on how that company is run. So let's say you now understand that you are invested in Tesla through your workplace pension, you have no way of influencing how that company behaves. And perhaps more importantly, neither did the trustees. No transparency and no voice. So these became and remain the fundamental issues that we seek to solve for. Transparency about where your money is being invested, and a voice or a vote on the issues that you care about most. So we've come a long way since the grassroots campaign that Georgia ran at Cambridge University. This is the cover of Forbes, as you can see, about Tumelo, yes, but also discussing stewardship and AGM's voting. We're now a team of 50, a fintech scale-up, as you would call us, working across Bristol, London, and now also in New York, and backed by Fidelity and Legal & General, amongst others. This is important and exciting, yes, for us and those of us running Tumelo, but not just because of us, but because of voting and how it is now no longer a niche conversation about single pension members or one university endowment fund. It is now a global conversation about the power our money has and the way in which that power is or is not being exercised. So, as it says on the screen, and this is quoted from the Forbes article, who decides how woke companies should be? Well, currently, it's not you. It's people like Larry Fink. So Larry Fink is the CEO and founder of BlackRock. He currently controls around $9 trillion of assets on behalf of and for asset owners like pension schemes, charities and foundations. And if we take BlackRock with State Street and Vanguard, the big three global fund managers now collectively control more than $19 trillion. $19 trillion. So how do we feel about this concentrated group managing so much of our money? Well, just last week, Larry Fink publicly said that he will no longer use the term ESG, suggesting it has become too politically toxic. He is now having to deal with, and I'm certainly not feeling sorry for Larry in this situation, but Larry is dealing with the political heat that he's getting from the left and the right of the political system in the US. This conversation about, anti-ESG rhetoric is real, it's getting stronger, and it's a really difficult issue for these fund managers to deal with. He's got people like in Texas, the state controller urging all pension funds within Texas to cut its ties with BlackRock because they are saying that BlackRock are risking returns by being overly concerned with environmental issues. Meanwhile, parties on the left, of course, argue the exact opposite. So I was at the ICGN conference a couple of weeks ago in Toronto in Canada, International Corporate Governance Networking, and there was this kind of continued conversation about green hushing, this new phrase, not greenwashing, but green hushing, where you've got some really exciting and impactful investors now starting to talk less about the things that they're doing because they're worried about some of the backlash that they might get. Another kind of worrying trend that we're seeing. So there are exceptions to every rule, and there are some large asset owners in the UK and abroad, like the BT Pension Scheme, the Church of England, and Nest Pensions, who I mentioned earlier, who invest through products called segregated mandates, allowing them to retain voting rights and have a say on the companies that they're invested in and how they manage their money. As ever, money does talk. But for the majority, including some very big pension providers like Aegon and Scottish Widows, and almost all the funds represented in this room, investments are held within pooled funds, where the fund manager retains those voting rights. This means that the organisation who has the fiduciary responsibility for your money has no seat at the stewardship table, no stick to hold companies to account, no vote. So let's revisit last year's climate vote at BP. BlackRock voted against, State Street voted against, and Vanguard voted against. Or a shareholder proposal at Amazon for reporting on gender and racial pay. BlackRock against, State Street against. You can probably guess the next one. So it is the same three fund managers here that now own nearly 25% of the S&P 500. That is all votable shares across the top 500 companies in America, with experts predicting that this number will grow by the 40s to 40% by the mid-2030s. They already are or will become the biggest enactors of corporate governance globally. Our technology is built to change this. So pass-through voting with Tumelo allows asset owners to take back voting control of the money that they have invested. We work with fund managers to literally split out the vote. So we have lots of different pension schemes, lots of different endowments, lots of different individuals. They might be retail investors investing into these pooled fund setups. And at the moment, all of the voting rights that are associated with those investments sit with the fund manager. Our technology allows it to break this down and provide those voting rights back to the asset owners. So that might be trustees of pension schemes, it might be CIOs running endowment funds. So what do we know at the moment? Well, of course, voting is not always a binary choice. It would be wrong to suggest it is. But when we further analyse the current voting behaviour of managers, we can see in black and white the challenge an asset owner has if they want to choose a fund manager who is fairly reflecting their views and the views of their beneficiaries. So I've used a pension fund for this analysis, but it could be representative of any number of funds here. So we can see for this specific fund, they've got a number of different fund managers voting, and on all proposals where differing fund managers voted on that same proposal, 21% of the time, the votes were misaligned. If we look at the top two fund managers representing that fund, misalignment is over 56% of the time. So thankfully, regulators are beginning to wake up and accept that the current concentration of voting power is not serving the best interests of beneficiaries or of our people or of our planet. So various different regulations have come out. So DWP, the Department for Work and Pensions, via the Task Force for Pension Scheme Voting Implementation, want greater ownership to be placed on asset owners. They want asset owners to start taking more control at the moment. The FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, via the Vote Reporting Group, want more transparency over the current voting behaviours of fund managers. Often when I speak to asset owners, they just don't know how fund managers are voting their shares. Their equity is invested, and then all voting rights are delegated. They have no visibility over these issues. And finally, the FRC, the Financial Reporting Council, via the UK Stewardship Code, insists that all stakeholder views are included in stewardship decisions, including pension scheme beneficiaries. And that's a really important one, right? So Principle 6 of the UK Stewardship Code talks about understanding the views of underlying beneficiaries, giving everybody a voice, not just asset owners. So this is where some of you may have come across Tumelo previously. So this is a campaign that we ran with Cushion, one of the UK master trusts, where through an app, so they can log into their pension and they can see our technology and get asked these exact same questions. So on issues like human rights or climate change, how do you feel? So the question posed here is, should Amazon provide additional reporting on its gender and racial pay? How do the members of that pension scheme feel? Do they think this should happen or should it not happen? Once those votes have been placed, we collate all of that data back together and then provide it through to the trustees of that scheme or through to the underlying fund managers so that they can take that information into consideration as part of their stewardship processes. At the moment, these groups are just completely excluded from the process. As a member of a pension scheme, I have absolutely no idea how my votes are being cast, and we think that needs to change. So, as a bit of a takeaway, what can I do? Well, I challenge you both professionally and at a personal level to challenge the status quo. It is critical that we begin to see rapid change from the companies who we entrust with our capital. So ask probing questions. Which fund managers are you using and why? What are their voting policies? Are those votes aligned with my own or those of the organisation that I represent? And if not, the final question, I guess, is why not? And I'll leave it there.